Hi, I'm Kirby Allison. I'm so excited to be here today at the Gaziano Girling Factory here in Kettering, just north of Northampton in the beautiful English countryside. I'm here with Bespoke shoemaker Daniel Wegan, widely considered to be probably one of the best bespoke shoemakers around right now, known for his exceptional last making, but also as someone who is able to also construct the shoe through the shoemaking process itself. As part of our series on last makers, we're going to sit down, we're going to chat with Daniel for a little bit, and then we're going to have him take my measurements and talk us through his thought process as he's preparing to measure the foot and make a last. Okay, Daniel, so you're going to take some measurements. So this would be the first part of the bespoke process is, you're sitting down, you're going to take my measurements and really begin to kind of understand and visualize how you're going to create the last.
Exactly. So I will take an outline of the foot, circumference measurement, and some height measurements, and also some other notes about potential particularities or any special requests. So usually I look at what kind of shoes people are wearing when they come see me. If they never had bespoke shoes before, I tend to look at if they like. First I ask them if they like the shoes they're wearing or if they're problematic. And if there's something that they quite like, I can kind of tell if they like a looser fit, a tighter fit, and also kind of how they wear their shoes, if they're pronating or anything they might. If they wear their toes a lot, I might suggest they have steel toe tips on their shoes. If they don't, I probably won't mention it if I see there's an old pair without any extensive wear in that area. And then we just start with the basics, which would be taking an outline of the foot, and also feeling for anything that might stand out, if it's fleshy or bony. And I use a draft or a foot tracer that makes sure that there's no difference in the angle of the pencil while you're drawing it. And then I take a 45-degree angle of the arch. And it doesn't have to be 45, but it's good to know what angle you're using. And then I take semi-weight bearing measures.
So we're just measuring the width or circumference at this point?
Yeah, so now we're measuring the circumference on the straight ball.
The straight ball, and that's from where to where?
It's from the inside joint to the little toe, or generally straight across, but I will adapt the angle a little bit. It might not be dead straight, but those would be the widest part. So you want to make sure you're catching that part and not the slimmest part. You might end up with quite a tight shoe. And I tug at it a little bit to see kind of what it's doing, if it's flexy or rigid. And then I take the classic joint measure from the inside joint to the base of the little toe. Because it's at an angle, it can be a little bit less accurate sometimes, or less trustworthy. And I don't know what this measurement is called, but it's just under the waist measurement. And I go from the outside joint of the toe to just behind the inside joint.
Have you evolved your measurement approach at all the longer you've been doing this?
I think it's ever evolving. I used to take some measurements that I don't take anymore. And I think it's always good to have more information than you need rather than less. So I'm always looking at areas where might give me more useful information. And also measurements should be easy to take. It shouldn't be too complicated. Even though you take a lot of measurements, it should be pretty straightforward so that they're easy to understand, and also they need to be applicable to a last. Because sometimes measuring a last can be different from measuring a foot. And then I check where the joint is, and I measure to the point where I will measure the instep.
Are there any key parts of kind of the foot that just have to be respected? Like, that if, okay, you might be able to get the width a little off, but,
Yeah, I think if you have the outline of the foot pretty close and the circumference measurements, you're probably 80-90% there. As far as comfort goes, a lot of the additional measurements that tell you where the volume distribution is kind of things that will help you avoid unnecessary creasing of the shoe or just distortion of the shoe when you put it on your foot. You might feel like you might put your foot in a shoe and not feel like it's necessarily painful, but you don't feel like they're in harmony with each other, that they're kind of fighting each other. And that's usually what happens with ready-to-wear shoes. But if you get it right on a bespoke last, it'll feel like a broken-in pair of shoes. Because leather is soft and will mold to you, but on a bespoke pair, I think the amount of breaking in and so on should be kind of kept to a minimum. So that would be the high instep measurement, or I think it's called the husk sometimes. That might be a Swedish word for it. And then I check the heel measures at the same position as I took the circumference measurements.
What is that right there?
So this is a profile gauge. I think I've seen some of your bootmaker use these. And I think first time I saw this was in a German book on shoemaking. And when I saw it, I thought that made a lot of sense. So I started using it for all kinds of things. But now I use it mostly for the straight ball and for the instep sometimes. And it gives you a really good idea of the volume distribution around the joint.
And how does that inform the last making?
It kind of tells you where you need to take off wood or where you might need to put it on. And like I mentioned before, it helps you with volume distribution, and those are usually the things that causes creasing on a shoe.
Right, so I guess you could get the same measurement, but the distribution of the volume could be...
Exactly. You can have a rectangle or a circle that have the same circumference, but they're very different in shape. And that's what we're trying to avoid with this. And then I take some height measurements at the joint. Kind of halfway down the big toe, or whichever point is the highest. But unless you have hammer toes or something similar, the big toe will be the highest points you have to deal with.
So you're saying that a really well-executed bespoke shoe should also have very controlled creasing also?
Yeah, it depends kind of what the customer wants. If he wants a shape of shoe for a particular reason that might not necessarily harmonize very well with his foot, because that's his dream shoe, you might have to make a little bit of compromise. But if a shoe creases just by you putting it on, I would say something is wrong. Depending on how people walk and so on, it might affect it a little bit. But if you just put it on and look at it and it's starting to do odd creases, the volume distribution is off. So then I take the same outline as I do seated, just to see how much the foot expands under load. And I'll also check the length. About 7 1/4 on the stick, so about 9 1/2 probably. Now I'll also check the ankle height. And then I check the joint measurement under load. And usually the difference between weight bearing and non-weight bearing is about 1/4 of an inch. So if you check the measurement non-weight bearing and add 1/4 of an inch, you're usually pretty close. And then I check where the highest point of the foot is to know, and this the same here, gives you information about the volume distribution and how high from the ground the widest part of the foot is, to know where to start to taper it in the top line. And I also check the arch.
And you're using different colored pen to kind of mark each one of these?
Yeah, I use a red one for seated and a black one for standing, just to help tell them apart. Sometimes if a foot doesn't expand a lot, they kind of blend into each other. If it's a big difference, it's quite easy to tell them apart. And some of this information with the inside ankle bone, it gives you a good idea how to cut your pattern to make sure you get a nice high top line, but not too so high that it'll interfere with your ankle. And I'll also take an ankle measurement in case you ever need any boots.
So from the same measurements with how you take them, you could do a boot last, like an Oxford and a casual?
Yeah, I would do different lasts for these styles of shoes, but I would measure the foot the same. So the measurements of your foot stays the same, but you change them slightly. Most of it stays the same, but the style of shoe will have some impact on what the last needs to look like.
So if the circumference and the trace measurements are, kind of create 90% of the fit, what would you say that extra 10%? How is that? Are those fit elements captured?
I think the volume distribution, knowing if your foot has more fullness on the inside of its center or on the outside. If you have a dead straight foot with no pronating or so, it's usually not a big deal, and you might fit quite well in something more off the rack. Mm-hmm. But if you do have issues, which is usually one of the reasons why people come to a bespoke shoemaker to solve those problems and get rid of those issues, you need to take care of the volume distribution, especially to make the shoe last a long time. If there's problem with the distribution, that's usually when your toes will press over the edge of the sole, or if you look at the sole underneath when you wear it, you can see if you're wearing on the outside or the inside, and that's usually caused by an issue with the volume distribution of the last not suiting your feet.
Interesting.
So if I just take this from you, then I draw the outline of the back of the foot and the top. And then I take a foot impression. So just lift your foot, Kirby, and place that. And this gives a pressure of, if you lift that, gives me an idea of the pressure points of your foot and where you put most of your load. So this will help me give me a little bit of information of the volume distribution.
And I guess it's another tracing also.
Yeah, you have another tracing.
So what do you see here that would kind of inform how you would make my
last? I see a pretty healthy arch, nothing that stands out. So predictions are good for a nice, elegant shoe. Usually the physique of the client overall will be very represented in the foot. So if they're tall, slim, and a bit bony, usually the feet are the same. And if they're a fuller build, usually the feet are like that as well. But it kind of gives me an idea how to construct the insole pattern to fit you comfortable. And same there, just getting that harmony to get a new pair of shoes feel a little bit more broken in, and not something that you have to fight with to get used to. It should be like an old pair of shoes.
Yeah. At what point are you starting to kind of visualize the silhouette of the shoe?
I usually discuss with the customer what they want before I measure them. So just taking their shoes off, I kind of try to look for what's going to get in the way.
Mm-hmm. But not everything works for everyone, so...
No, and I think sometimes people look at something on a shelf and admire something, but they need to remember that they're going to wear the shoe, and it's more about them looking good in the shoe than having a good looking pair of shoes in a box somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it needs to complement them, and a lot of times people try to maybe overcompensate the issues they have elsewhere. So if they're a bigger guy, they might want really slim shoes because that's the shoe they dream about, but it might not harmonize with their body shape and so on. So I think basically like working with what you have physically and accepting what you look like and try to work with that is always the best way.
Yeah, I mean, not trying to fight the process, right?
No. Sooner or later you'll end up with something that fits you anyway.
So based off of kind of these measurements, I mean, what do you think my ideal kind of shape or silhouette? I mean, I don't know. Could you describe that at this point, or do you have to?
I think you can have, pretty much what you want. I think a lot of people, tend when they go bespoke prefer more chisel toes, things that's hard to get in ready to wear. Mm-hmm. So I would probably go for something like that. I think most of our clients prefer like a kind of soft square toe, not too aggressive, at least not for the first couple of pairs. Mm-hmm. And unless they have a very strong will to own a particular shape, that's usually what I suggest. Yeah. But most people are drawn to something that we have. We have quite a lot of samples in our store, and they see something they like, and we start from there.
You guys do have a lot of toe shapes. What do you think, I mean, the evolution of the last is? So like, you'll take these measurements, you'll create a last, we'll do a fitting, but ultimately you have to make the shoe and I have to wear it. Mm-hmm. I mean, does a good last maker get that perfect? Or does a last evolve or get better with the second pair and the third pair? Like at what point is there diminishing return and a good last maker should have, arrived or stabilized at that shape?
I think there's many good ways of working, and whatever way you're comfortable working and how to develop the last for the customer, I think is the way you should do it. In this field of work, the demands are usually quite high, and getting something wrong will probably be a big problem that you as a craftsman have to deal with. So whichever method you use to make sure that you get a happy customer, it's the way you should go about it. And I'm sure there's last makers out there that's way more experienced than me and maybe feel like my way of doing it is a bit excessive. And but then there's maybe some last makers that could maybe use some of my methods.
Yeah,
so,
Yeah. Well, I think the customer also needs to be committed to a certain evolutionary process too, right?
Yeah, it's for me to make a pair of shoes that fit, it's not that hard, but to fit what the customer had in mind, it's an educational process for both of us. Mm-hmm. And if they're coming to me to buy a pair of shoes the first time, when he says he wants something, it's my interpretation of his wish. Yeah. It's not exactly what he had in mind. So by having a fitting or two, it allows us to have something physical there to discuss, that we're looking at the same object and we can critique it and improve it together. Yeah. Whilst when it's just an idea on a piece of paper, it's harder for us, especially for somebody as a customer that doesn't maybe know shoe terminology and have different reference points than I might have. So it just helps us to talk the same language.
So is this the last piece, or is there?
This is it. This is all I need. Your foot was quite nice and smooth, nothing in particular that sticks out, so I don't need too many. Maybe the instep there, as you mentioned. You're quite a slim guy, so you're not going to have too much flesh on your feet, and you can kind of feel the bones and the veins in there. So it'd be something I'd be a little bit curious about when I'm making the last. But generally, for the first fitting, I kind of try to stick to my method and make something that fits, because if I listen too much to the customer, he might give me information that end up, my interpretation might be wrong. Yeah. Somebody that might think they wear their shoes super tight, when to a shoemaker, they might just be a well-fitting pair of shoes, and I might end up making something too tight. So I go by the measurements, and then we take it from there.
Yeah, great. Hey, Daniel, thank you so much.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate it. What a pleasure.